Louisiana. When you hear the name, you probably think of Mardi Gras, amazing food, and those incredible bayous. But wow, underneath all that is a story that's just so complex and fascinating. So today, we're going to dive right into that history. A story of ancient cities, clashing empires, and a spirit of resilience that really defines the state.
All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this epic story. We've got it broken down into 6 main chapters. We're going to start thousands of years in the past, way before the pyramids, and bring it all the way up to the Louisiana of today. Let's jump in.
So first up, we're rewinding the clock. I mean way back, long before any Europeans even dreamed of crossing the Atlantic. This land was already home to some of the most advanced societies in all of ancient North America.
So who do you think built cities in America over 5,000 years ago? The answer is probably not what you'd expect. It happened right here, in ancient Louisiana. You had these incredible mound-building cultures creating massive earthworks. And get this, they were doing it before the Great Pyramids in Egypt were even built. What's so amazing about this timeline is that it shows this constant innovation, stretching over thousands of years. Just think about that. You go from hunter-gatherers building these complex structures at Watson Break to this huge trading hub at Poverty Point, and then later you see them adopting traditions from the Hopewell culture way up in the Ohio Valley. This was not a static world. It was dynamic and always evolving.
So after these powerful native societies began to decline, a totally new chapter kicked off. The European empires had their eyes on a massive prize, the Mississippi River, and they were ready to fight for it.
Man, this era was a whirlwind of changing flags and shifting cultures. The French show up and claim the place. But right after, the first ships carrying enslaved Africans arrive, a brutal turning point that would forever shape the state. Then suddenly, it's Spanish territory. That's when the Acadians, the Cajuns, start to show up. And just when you think you've got it figured out, Napoleon secretly gets it back for France. This is where that famous Louisiana gumbo of cultures really starts to cook.
And that brings us to a moment that changed everything. We're talking about a single real estate deal that didn't just transform Louisiana, it literally doubled the size of the United States and paved the way for an economic boom built on a terribly tragic foundation.
So by 1803, Napoleon's grand plans for an American empire had completely fizzled out, especially after the successful slave revolution in Haiti. He needed cash for his wars in Europe, so he made this unbelievable offer to the young United States, and just like that, the destiny of a nation was changed forever. Now, this new American territory quickly became the heart of the slave economy. And this number, it's just staggering. By 1860, 47% of Louisiana's entire population was enslaved. This massive, brutal system of forced labor was the engine that powered the state's incredible wealth from cotton and sugar. And the wealth was just undeniable. New Orleans exploded, becoming this huge, bustling port city. But we have to remember, all that prosperity, all that growth, was built on the backs of over 330,000 enslaved people. The tension from that system was building, and it was about to boil over. Yeah, that golden age of pre-war Louisiana, it was a house of cards, built on a brutal and unsustainable system. It led straight into the Civil War, and even when the fighting stopped, a whole new system of oppression rose right up from the ashes. Louisiana went with the Confederacy, but that didn't last long in practice. The Union captured New Orleans super early in the war, which was a huge blow. After it was all over, during Reconstruction, there was this brief, hopeful moment where African Americans gained some real political power. But that progress was met with just vicious, violent resistance. And that old system came roaring back, legally sanctioned by 3 little words: separate but equal. This infamous idea came from a Supreme Court case that started right here in Louisiana with a man named Homer Plessy. When the court ruled against him, it basically gave a constitutional green light to segregation all across the South for decades.
And if you want to see the impact of all this, just look at the numbers. In 1896, this is how many black men were registered to vote in Louisiana. Over 130,000. They were a serious political force.
Now, fast forward just 4 years. A new state constitution brought in poll taxes, literacy tests, all these barriers. And this is the number of black voters left. It's a drop of more than 95%. An entire community was silenced, just like that. All right, moving into the 20th century, things start to get shaken up again. This was an era of powerful, larger-than-life politicians, huge migrations of people, and the beginning of that long, hard fight for civil rights.
And he just can't talk about this period without talking about Governor Huey the Kingfish Long. I mean, what a figure. To his supporters, he was a total hero, building roads, bridges, giving free textbooks to poor kids. But to his opponents, he was a dictator in the making, consolidating power through any means necessary. With the Great Depression hitting hard, his share our wealth message made him a savior to many, but his methods were terrifying to others. His assassination in 1935 is one of those great what-ifs of American history.
But beyond just one person, the state itself was going through these huge changes. You had the Great Migration, with hundreds of thousands of African Americans leaving the South to escape Jim Crow. Then World War II came along and industrialized the economy. And finally, after decades of brave activism, the Civil Rights Movement brought landmark federal laws that finally restored the right to vote.
And that brings us to the modern era. This is a time when Louisiana's legendary resilience gets put to the test over and over again, by Mother Nature and by the echoes of its own complicated past.
And in 2005, Hurricane Katrina was just a devastating blow. The storm was a monster, yeah, but the real catastrophe was man-made. The federal levees failed. 80% of New Orleans went underwater. It was a massive loss of life and a humanitarian crisis that laid bare these deep, long-standing issues of race and inequality.
So, at the end of the day, to really get Louisiana, you have to embrace all its contradictions. It's a place where this one-of-a-kind culture was born from centuries of collision and conflict. It's a story about incredible wealth that was built on incredible injustice. And more than anything, it's a story about people who time and time again find the strength to rebuild against all odds.
We really hope you enjoyed this deep dive into Louisiana's history. If you did, you should definitely check out our whole playlist of U.S. state histories. And of course, make sure you subscribe to Notebook Summaries so you don't miss the next one.
You know, as we've seen, the only constant in Louisiana's story has been change. From the ancient people building mounds to the modern struggles with a changing coastline and old inequalities, its story is always being written. It just leaves you with one big question. How will all that history shape the chapter that comes next?